Rudy, how does airstrip patient monitoring work?
So airstrip patient monitoring takes data off of the GE CareScape network and sends it through the GE CareScape gateway. So all of the GE vital statistics, numerics, and waveforms come out of the GE CareScape gateway and get sent over to an airstrip server where a clinician or doctor, nurse, whoever has the capability to launch the airstrip patient monitoring application. With that application, they can take a look at what's going on at critical care patients, what's happening at the patient at that particular time. It's near real-time waveforms, and it updates continuously for all the numerics, blood pressures, waveforms. You'll be able to see waveforms, blood pressures. We also have the capability to monitor telemetry events. So if you're on a telemetry device and you have a palpitation in the heart or something happens and it gets caught as an event on the central station, we then capture that event and then send it over to airstrip. The nurse can then call the clinician, talk to the clinician about what's happening to the patient. The doctor can be in the hospital or outside the hospital, launch the application and see what's going on real time with the patient. Also take a look at the incident, and they'll be able to see what happens 6 seconds before the event and 6 seconds after the event. So then they can have the ability to take better care of the patient and figure out what needs to happen from a workflow perspective so the patient's safety is not put at risk.
What are your plans for Europe?
So the plans for Europe today, we've launched in the U.S. and we are working with airstrip to go global. GE is the exclusive reseller of airstrip patient monitoring and airstrip cardiology in the U.S. and globally as well. So currently we are working with airstrip to do a global launch that will happen sometime later this year.
So how is licensing going to work?
So in the U.S. today, the licensing model is a software as a service. In Europe and globally, we're still working with the countries to understand today how they license software and what that would look like. So it's undetermined today how we'll go to the market in a global environment, but we are looking at whether software as a service, capitalization of the expenses, and today there's been no determination on what that looks like.
Simeon, two of the hot topics here at HIMSS 12 are EMRs and workflow. What do you consider to be the present situation of EMRs?
I think that we are reaching the end of the current generation of EMRs. We've been able to use them successfully as a documentation tool and as a mechanism to aggregate clinical information, both discrete and non-discrete. An example of non-discrete being a scanned document. However, many large organizations now are facing increasing difficulties consolidating data from multiple sources, and the buzzword here at HIMSS this year is interoperability. Everybody says they can connect with everybody else, but the reality is that this is very difficult. And what makes this particularly difficult is that translating one system to another, one database term to another, requires you to normalize data across multiple systems. And the investments in large organizations to share systems and share data is now becoming prohibitive as you establish extremely large integrated delivery networks and other systems of this type. One almost questions whether the integrated delivery networks are going to be successful in the future because it is not clear that they will be able to handle the complexity of their data and be able to operationalize that data for clinical decision making. Perhaps the future of EMR is of a more complicated and more sophisticated data model. Let me give you a simple example. Let's take blood pressure. In the usual electronic medical record, there is two fields of blood pressure, systolic and diastolic. But that doesn't tell you the story of blood pressure. Blood pressure is lying, sitting, and standing. It may be what the patient reports from home. It may be automated or not automated. It may be done preoperatively, postoperatively, during the surgery. Or it might be because somebody has an arterial line in place in an ICU where they're recording blood pressures every 15 seconds. If you think about the complexity of just blood pressure, how do I determine whether somebody has hypertension or not? What are the criteria I'm going to use? The very assumptions of medicine has to be rewritten for all the different data sources that are going to bear on that. If I need to adjust somebody's medications in the ICU because they're now relatively hypertensive, then which blood pressure am I using? So even looking at an issue like blood pressure, I may have 30 or 40 data elements dealing with blood pressure and the appropriate metadata. When you generalize that to the hundreds and hundreds of relevant medical fields, as you look to use that data for clinical decision support and the next generation of improved outcomes of healthcare, I'm now overwhelmed that my current data model is insufficient. And to set up crosswalk tables for every single system becomes prohibitive. So some people are now looking, and particularly here at the meeting, we know that Microsoft and GE has announced a joint venture to take their advanced data models that they have built with, in GE's case, Calibria, and in Microsoft's case, Amalga, to begin to try to create a language franca, a standard set of data information that could be used across both EMRs and interoperability. This will be extremely important as we go forward into the next generation system. The complexity of these are such is that the investment of both organizations are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which now puts EMR into a whole new category. For the German audience, what's exciting about this is that these are standard international data models that be applicable whether you're in the US, Germany, or in China.
So, looking at workflow, what are the developments there?
The main development in workflow is that medicine is finally catching up with industrial processes. I've always marveled at the efficiency of the German factory and the productivity that has been achieved. The US actually is catching on. We've learned from the Germans, we've learned from the Japanese, and we are making progress every day in automating our factories using standard Lean or Six Sigma or the Toyota way of re-engineering our industrial processes. And industrial production in the United States productivity is rising rapidly despite the downturn of the economy. Well, we and others in healthcare have finally started to apply those operational principles. So essentially, these are analytically driven models where we now are able to take discrete data elements and measure what we do. We're able to make changes into both the clinical and administrative processes and begin to implement advanced workflow engines and tasking engines in order to improve both clinical process. So let me give you an example. In the past, if a physician saw a patient and they wanted to see the patient, or the patient should see a consultation with a cardiologist, they would order a cardiology consultation. But they had no mechanism to know whether the patient went for that consultation. They had no mechanism to send the patient a reminder letter, and they had no opportunity to look at the outcome of not going for that consultation. We now have the ability to identify patients who are scheduled for appointments that either didn't keep them or never scheduled them, and reach out to them using either snail mail, email, texting, to bring them into a more comprehensive healthcare delivery. It's interesting that when you ask patients why did they go to the consult, most of the time they tell you, I forgot. Well, you ask them, well, do you mind that I reminded you? Of course not. You reminding me told me that you care about my health. So this bonds a patient to the organization, but most importantly, it does the right thing. The principle that we're applying to the operational efficiency of healthcare is that if you do the right thing for the organization, the money will follow.